Everyone told her not to trust strangers. They said the world was different now, that kindness was dangerous. She barely earned enough to survive herself. And yet, when she saw a man shivering outside her small shop late at night, she made a choice that could have ruined her life. She let him sleep inside. What happened the next morning changed everything. Her name was Mariam. Not the kind of name people remembered for long, not the kind that turned heads or stuck in conversations after she left the room. She owned a tiny roadside shop squeezed between two quiet buildings that looked older than they had any right to be. The paint on her sign had faded so badly that people sometimes walked past without noticing it was a shop at all. Sometimes they'd realize halfway down the street, turn back, squint at the lettering, then shrug and keep walking. Inside, there wasn't much to look at. A few loaves of bread sat on a wooden shelf that tilted slightly to the left. Sachets of water were stacked in plastic crates that had gone from blue to gray over the years. Candles, soap, matches. A small basket of oranges that she'd bought cheap because they were starting to soften. The kind of things people bought quickly, without thinking. The kind of things that barely left profit behind, no matter how many she sold. Every night, Mariam counted her money slowly. Not because there was a lot of it, but because she hoped she had counted wrong the first time. She never had. Coins made most of the sound when she emptied the small metal box onto the counter. Notes were rare. Sometimes she laughed quietly to herself when the total came up short again. Not because it was funny, but because if she didn't laugh, she might cry, and crying wouldn't change the number. She had learned how to fix things instead of replacing them. A cracked shelf held together with wire she'd twisted herself. A door hinge that squeaked every time it moved, announcing customers before they could announce themselves. A light bulb she refused to change because it still worked most days, even if it flickered when the wind picked up. Closing early was a luxury she couldn't afford. So she stayed open late, even when the street emptied out and the air grew cold enough to see her breath. That night felt like all the others. The wind moved through the road in long, slow breaths, carrying plastic bags and dried leaves in lazy circles. A stray cat watched from across the street, yellow eyes unblinking like it had seen this exact moment 1,000 times before. Mariam was just about to lock the door when she noticed him. He stood a few steps away from the shop, not close enough to enter, not far enough to disappear into the shadows. His jacket looked thin, like it had once been warm but had given up trying. One sleeve hung slightly lower than the other. His hands were tucked under his arms, and his eyes were fixed on the ground like he was waiting for something to end. He wasn't begging. He wasn't speaking. Just standing there, breathing clouds of white air into the night. Mariam hesitated. She had learned to be careful. People had warned her enough times. Still, something about the way he stood there, so still, so quiet, made her clear her throat. "Are you okay?" she asked. Her voice came out softer than she meant it to. The man looked up slowly, like he hadn't expected anyone to notice him at all. "I'm fine," he said quickly. Too quickly. Then he paused, and his shoulders dropped slightly. "Actually, could I sit for a moment?" His voice was calm. Tired. Not desperate. Just tired in a way that suggested he'd been tired for a while now, and had stopped expecting it to change. Mariam glanced down the street. Empty. The street light 2 blocks down flickered once, then held. She nodded. He sat on the small wooden bench by the shop entrance, keeping his hands folded together in his lap, as if afraid of touching anything that wasn't his. Minutes passed. Mariam pretended to arrange items on the shelf, but she kept watching him from the corner of her eye. His shoes were wet. His breathing was shallow and deliberate, like each breath was something he had to remember to take. Finally, he spoke again. "Would it be okay if I had some warm water?" he asked. "I'll pay." She waved the money away before he could reach for it and poured the water without a word. When she handed it to him, their hands almost touched. His fingers were cold. He drank slowly, carefully, like the warmth was something fragile he didn't want to waste. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to." She shrugged. "It's just water." He smiled at that. Not a wide smile. Just enough to show he meant it. When he finished, he stood up immediately, like he didn't want to overstay his welcome. "I should go," he said. Mariam watched him step back into the cold. Watched his shoulders tense against the wind that had picked up again. Something tightened in her chest. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the way he hadn't asked for much. Maybe it was the way he thanked her twice for something as simple as warm water. Maybe it was the memory of nights she didn't like thinking about anymore. Nights when she had been the one standing in the cold. She spoke before she could stop herself. "You can stay inside, just till morning." He turned slowly. "Inside?" he asked, like he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. She nodded, already feeling unsure. "I'll lock myself in the back room," she added quickly. "And you'll leave early, before people start coming around." He hesitated now, and for a moment she thought he might refuse. "I don't want to cause trouble," he said. "You're not," she replied. At least, she hoped he wasn't. He stepped inside carefully, like the shop was something fragile that might break if he moved too quickly. She locked the front door behind him, checked it twice, then locked the small back room behind her. The room was barely big enough for the thin mattress she slept on, and the plastic basin she used to wash her face in the mornings. As she lay down, her heart refused to slow. What if she was wrong? What if kindness had finally asked for too much? Outside the door, the shop was quiet. Too quiet. She lay on her side facing the wall, eyes wide open. The mattress beneath her was thin and uneven. She could feel the hard floor through it, like the room was reminding her not to get too comfortable. She pulled the blanket up to her chest and listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. Just the faint hum of the streetlight outside and the soft ticking of the clock she had bought years ago when she still believed time could be generous. She told herself to sleep. She didn't. Her mind kept drifting back to the front of the shop, to the stranger, to the way he had stepped inside so carefully, like he was afraid the floor might break beneath him. This was a mistake, she thought. She pictured the shelves in her mind, the bread, the soap, the few things she owned that stood between her and hunger. She had locked the door. She had locked herself in. Still, fear has a way of ignoring logic. She shifted slightly, and the mattress creaked. She froze, listening again. From the shop there came a small sound. Not loud, just a shuffle, like someone adjusting their weight. Her chest tightened. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer she hadn't said in years. Not because she expected an answer, but because it made the room feel less empty. Minutes passed. Or maybe hours. Time stretched strangely in the dark. She wondered who he was. Not the dramatic questions people like to ask. Not, was he dangerous? But simpler ones. Where had he been before tonight? What had gone wrong? Who was waiting for him, if anyone? Another sound drifted in, this time clearer. Metal. Soft. Careful. Her breath caught. She sat up slowly, heart pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it through the door. She held still, waiting for the sound to turn into something worse. It didn't. Instead, there was silence again. Longer this time. She exhaled shakily and pressed her palm against her chest, trying to calm herself. "You chose this," she reminded herself. "At least be brave enough to sit with it." She lay back down. Outside, the night deepened. The wind died down. Even the stray cat was gone. In the shop, the man moved once more. Slow footsteps, then nothing. Eventually, exhaustion won. Her thoughts softened. Her breathing slowed. Sleep came quietly without asking permission. She woke before the sun. The room was dim, the air cool against her face. For a brief moment, she forgot everything, then it rushed back all at once. The shop. The stranger. She sat up too quickly, heart racing. She listened. Nothing. No movement, no breathing, no sound at all. She stood, smoothing her clothes with trembling hands, and walked toward the door. Her fingers hovered over the lock. What if he was still there? What if he was gone? What if something was wrong? She unlocked the door slowly. The shop greeted her with silence. The front door was still locked. The man was gone. Her stomach dropped. She rushed forward, eyes scanning the shelves. The bread was still there, the crates of water untouched. The small cash box sat exactly where she'd left it. Nothing was missing. She frowned. Then she noticed something else. The floor looked cleaner. She hadn't swept the night before. She remembered that clearly. She had been too tired, but now the dust that usually clung to the corners was gone. She took a step further inside. The crooked shelf, the one held together with wire, stood straighter. She reached out and touched it. The wire had been tightened, adjusted. Not perfectly, but better than before. Her eyes moved around the shop, taking in details she usually ignored. The bench by the door had been shifted slightly, placed neatly against the wall. The loose hinge on the front door. She opened it gently. Didn't squeak. Her breath caught. On the counter, folded carefully, was a small piece of paper. She picked it up with slow fingers, as if afraid it might disappear. The handwriting was simple, slightly uneven, like someone who didn't write often but took care when they did. Thank you for trusting me when you didn't have to. I didn't sleep much. I wanted to leave things better than I found them. I hope today is kind to you. No name. No explanation. Just that. She stood there for a long moment, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. She didn't know what she had expected. Money, maybe, or some dramatic gesture that would make sense of the fear she'd carried all night. This was quieter, almost too quiet. She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. As she unlocked the shop for the day, the street began to wake up. Footsteps. Voices. The smell of bread from somewhere nearby. The first customer arrived earlier than usual. Morning, the woman said, glancing around. Your shop looks different. Mariam smiled faintly. Does it? She replied. She didn't know how to explain it. Not yet. As the morning passed, more people came. Some lingered longer than usual. Some noticed small things she had stopped seeing long ago. She worked quietly, her mind drifting back to the stranger, to the way he had thanked her, to the note still warm in her pocket. She thought that would be the end of it. She was wrong. By midday, Mariam had almost convinced herself that the night meant nothing. Kindness, she told herself, didn't need explanations. Sometimes it showed up. Sometimes it left. Still, the note stayed in her pocket. She touched it once or twice without realizing it, like a habit her hands had learned on their own. Around noon, a man she didn't recognize stopped in front of the shop. He wasn't dressed like most customers. His clothes were clean but worn, practical in a way that suggested travel. He stood for a moment, looking up at the faded sign, then inside the shop. "You're Mariam?" he asked. She nodded cautiously. "I'm looking for the owner," he continued. "That's me." He smiled, relieved. "I was told I'd find you here." "Told by who?" she asked. He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "A man who stayed here last night." Her heart skipped. She said nothing. The man reached into his bag and pulled out a small folder. Not thick, not impressive, just a few papers held together by a clip. "He asked me to give this to you," the man said, placing it on the counter. "And to tell you thank you, again." Mariam stared at the folder. "What is it?" she asked. The man glanced around the shop, then back at her. "There's a local program," he said. "It helps small businesses, repairs, supplies, sometimes training, not charity. just support. She didn't touch the folder. "And he?" she asked quietly. "He works with us," the man replied. "Travels around, talks to people, looks for places that don't usually ask for help." Mariam thought of the thin jacket, the wet shoes, the careful way he had sat on the bench. "He never said anything," she murmured. The man smiled. "He usually doesn't." She opened the folder slowly. Inside were forms. Simple ones. Nothing complicated. No promises written in bold letters. Just steps. Possibilities. "We'll come back in a few days," the man said. "If you're interested." She looked up. "And if I'm not?" He shrugged gently. "Then nothing changes." After he left, Mariam sat down on the bench by the door. Her hands rested on the folder, but her eyes drifted instead to the shelf he had fixed, the hinge he had tightened, the floor he had swept. He hadn't come to test her. He hadn't come to rescue her. He had come tired, cold, human, and she had treated him the same way. That evening she closed the shop at the usual time. Nothing had changed yet. The shelves were still mostly empty, the profits still small, but something felt steadier. A few days later, they returned. 2 people this time. Clipboards, measuring tape, quiet voices. They didn't make promises they couldn't keep. They replaced what was broken, reinforced what was weak, offered advice without judgment. The changes were small. A new shelf, better lighting, a sign that could actually be read from the road. Customers noticed, not all at once, not dramatically, but they came, and they stayed. Weeks passed. Mariam learned how to track her sales, how to restock smarter, how to close earlier without losing income. She smiled more, not because life had suddenly become easy, but because it felt possible. One afternoon, as she arranged new items on the shelf, she saw him again, across the street, standing where he had stood that night. This time he looked healthier, still simple, still quiet. Their eyes met. He nodded once. She stepped outside. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "Thank you." They stood there for a moment, the noise of the street moving around them. Then he turned and walked away, blending into the crowd like he always had. Mariam watched until she couldn't see him anymore. That night, as she closed her shop, she paused by the bench. A woman stood nearby, holding a child, looking unsure. "Are you still open?" the woman asked softly. Mariam smiled and unlocked the door. "Yes," she said. "Come in."